Hi, I'm Jane Akins, the City of North Port's Community Engagement Coordinator. Welcome to our podcast, Voices of North Port. In this series, we aim to preserve the living histories that shaped our city's identity by creating an audio archive through the voices who lived it. Our guest this week is Alice White. Hi, Alice. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for inviting me. This is great.
Great. So let's start from the beginning. When did you move to North Port and what brought you here?
Two very good questions. I came here in 1990, and what brought me here is mosquito control. Mosquitoes. I was working for Sarasota County Mosquito Control. I came actually first in 1990 to Sarasota. I was a teacher, and while I was waiting for a teaching job to come up, it was the summer, and I thought I need to get out and make some money, and they were looking for temporary help. So during the day, I worked with a tech, and we were frequently assigned to North Port. Imagine that, because people were always complaining about mosquitoes, so we would check the traps and go through the ditches and treat the ditches, and that's when I discovered North Port. And I said, this is where I want to live, because to me, what I saw was real Florida. The pine flatwoods, the palmettos, the sable palms, and the beautiful pines and oaks. This is what I wanted, and I didn't really see that to this extent anyplace else. So that's really what brought me to North Port.
So would you say that North Port was love at first sight, or did it grow on you? No pun intended.
It was love at first sight. I thought, though, that it looked a little harsh sometimes because the sun. That sun was so intense that I wasn't accustomed to that. I'm from New Jersey originally, so you had seasons, and even in the summer it wasn't like it is here at all. But I learned how to embrace Florida for all it is rather than battling it, and I also realized that is the best way to live here, because if you're going to engage in battle with our environment, you're going to lose.
And when you moved to North Port, you started something really special called the Welcome Wagon. For those that don't know about it, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, it was something that, because I had a house built, my house was finished in 1991, and that was the same year my son was born. But when I had the house built and moved in, I said, okay, now what? Like, nobody knew I was here, and I didn't know anything about North Port. I was living in Sarasota and commuting to Port Charlotte because my teaching job that I did eventually get was teaching algebra at Port Charlotte High School. So I was taking the interstate to Toledo Blade, which at that time was a 2-lane cow pasture road, yes. So I bypassed North Port all the time. So when I finally moved in, I said, I don't even know what's in this town. So there should be a welcome wagon. How come nobody's even giving me a map? Yes, back then there were paper maps. So I decided I would start my own welcome wagon and called it Welcome to North Port. So every month I went out at the last Sunday of every month, knocked on people's doors, literally, and gave them a little bag of goodies that I had collected from the businesses that were participating. And for that, I just would go into the business and say, do you want to be part of the welcome wagon? Just give me 50 items, because 50 was my limit for the bags for that month. And again, old school. This was calling up builders, calling up real estate offices, and just asking what closings they had for that month. That's how I knew where the new houses and the new people would be.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And where did this idea for a welcome wagon come from?
Well, again, I was from New Jersey, and it was something that I kind of grew up with, knowing there was, it's actually an actual business, I think, that's called the Welcome Wagon. So that's why I couldn't call mine the Welcome Wagon, because that's copyrighted and all that, and you have to pay a fee. So that's why I called it Welcome to North Port, and that was what I called it. So that's a good question.
I love that. What a great way to meet people in your community.
Right,
and make them feel welcome. Thank you for doing that. Okay, so you came to North Port, you had a child, you started the Welcome Wagon, and then you created a coffee shop?
Yes, but even before that,
okay,
because I had my child, Jake, he was born here. When I started looking around for things for new moms and for very young children, guess what? There wasn't anything here for kids. So I started a Mommy and Me group at what was then the new North Port Library on Tamiami Trail that was built in 1993. And every Saturday we would meet there and sing songs and play little games. And it was for children that were ages 4 and under. Because once they got to be 4, they usually went into daycare before they went into kindergarten. So I started that, and I met a lot of new moms through my welcome wagon because I would welcome them, and if I saw they had very young children, I would give them a flyer and say, hey, by the way, I have a Mommy and Me group. Why don't you join us? So they worked hand in hand. It was just a lot of fun.
That's great. Okay, so when did we start this coffee shop?
The coffee shop was in the mid-'90s, and that's when the gourmet coffee craze started coming across the country. And I thought, gee, we should have a coffee shop in North Port. At that time, there were these tea shops opening up. There was one in Punta Gorda. There was one in Port Charlotte. There was a really one that most people knew in Arcadia.
Hot tea.
Yes, hot tea, right.
Okay.
But I said, I'm going to start like a coffee shop. So I started that. I put that in the mid-'90s, and that was right next door to Quality TV. Mike Morales had just built that building, and he built a unit to rent, and I was his first renter. And I had folk singers come in, and of course I had gourmet coffee. I would grind the beans there, and that's when I started making homemade pies. So people really liked that, and I had Sunday special breakfasts that I would make, and it was a lot of fun. But North Port wasn't quite ready yet for a gourmet coffee shop. This again was way before its time, and also that's when I learned location, very important. So, but it was a great experience, and I'm glad I did it.
And what was the name of your coffee shop?
Oh, it was called the Coffee Cafe.
The Coffee Cafe.
Yes, it was actually a business. I think they're still there in Venice, and that's their name. And I told them that once when I went in there. I said, I had a shop called the Coffee Cafe, and I actually still have an old menu from my shop, and I showed it to them, and they said, oh, and that's all they said.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's funny.
If any listeners have been to the Coffee Cafe, I would love to hear about it. Reach out to me. Okay, so you said that is when your love for pies, you started making pies too, when you had the Coffee Cafe. So you still have a pie business to this day.
Yes, I continued to do that after the coffee shop closed, that I was just making them on the side. People would ask for that. And then I started in earnest making them in the early, I guess it was around 2010 that I started going to farmers markets and selling them only on weekends, though, farmers markets, because I was still teaching full-time. And then Florida passed the cottage food law, which really gave permission to sell certain goods baked in your home kitchen and sell them to the public. So that really opened up the door for a lot of people to do that. Now, when I retired, I started to sell at the farmers markets, but that was just too much work.
And what would you say is your best seller?
My best seller is apple pie, because everything is homemade. I make my own pie crust, hand roll everything, and the apples, I peel the apples. So when people say, boy, I've never had an apple pie like this before, and I said, and I know why, because everything is fresh, and when you put something in a pie and bake it immediately, there's nothing that tastes like that. Yes. In fact, just to share a story, my son is involved with flying a charter jet for around the country, and they deal with high-end celebrities. That's all I'll say. And he had, can you bake a little pie for so-and-so? And I said, okay. So I baked a little apple pie and gave it to him for one of his on one of his flights. And he said that man said, this is the best apple pie he's ever had in his life. And I said, did you tell him why?
It was made with love.
That's right, right, yeah.
And what would you say is your favorite pie?
My favorite pie to make is anything but an apple pie. Because apple pies, they're labor intensive. You have to peel the apples. And yes, I have one of those apple peelers, but it's still one apple at a time. And then it doesn't get the ends, so you have to peel the ends, and then you have to slice it. Very labor intensive, yeah.
So your pie business is called Pielicious.
That's right. Yes.
And where does that name come from?
Well, I was an algebra teacher, So it's the pi, the Greek pi symbol that I use for my symbol. And I just thought it went really well together. But I do spell it P-I-E, licious. But it's just a little take on that.
And is March 14th a big day in the pie business?
That's right. 3/14 is Pi Day. It's P-I Day. That's not National Pie Day. I can't even remember when National P-I-E Day is, but it's not March 14th. That is P-I Day. Yes, in fact, I was featured for a couple of years up in Sarasota, the ABC. They used to have, what was it called? Chef Judy. She used to have a cooking show, and she had me up there for a couple of years showing how to make a pie on Pie Day. It was a lot of fun.
That's great. I love it. Okay, so everybody knows you are commissioner and the mayor. What motivated you to run for commissioner?
I thought about it, but it wasn't really something I gravitated towards necessarily. I really didn't think about being a commissioner for the city of North Port. Actually, I had ran for county commissioner in 2020, and that was because for our district, for county commissioner, there was only one person who was running. And I just feel very strongly about our democratic process that you should have an opponent, at the very least, so people do have a choice. So I threw my hat in the ring for that. No, I didn't win that, obviously. That was Ron Kutzinger won for 2020. And I said, well, it was a great experience, though. I really got to go out and meet people that I normally would have never met before, and been to groups, and that was great. And then what happened in the 2020 election for city commissioner is the person who lived in my district resigned 2 weeks after he took office. So somebody said, hey, Alice, they're having a special election, and it's going to be in March. And this was like the end of December. And they said, why don't you think about running? And I said, well, it would only be 3 months long because that's it. We would start now, and we only have until March till the election. So, okay, I'll do that. I can do that for 3 months because that whole year that I did for the county, that was a year out of my life that I'll never get back. So I ran and I won, and that was really, really neat. I really was happy about that, and also I realized I am now in a position to do something at a different level for the community other than what I was doing before.
So 2020, that's height of the pandemic. What was it like running for commissioner where there might have been restrictions on being in the public?
Yes, and I almost forgot about that because when I was looking back, I've been going through all of my boxes of stuff, and I realized, that's right, that was during COVID. They were Zoom meetings. That's what we were having, Zoom meet and greets. That's what we had to have because it was really restricted as far as having gatherings. And even, there was no going out to the restaurants when you invite people out and you give them some hors d'oeuvres or something because people just didn't want to do that, and I don't blame them. So that was really quite challenging, that whole thing, being on Zoom, dealing with that, especially in the summer with thunderstorms, and all of a sudden you lose your power and everything goes out and there goes your meeting, So it was quite challenging, yeah.
Okay, so I skipped a little bit of ahead and went to talk about commissioner, but before then you started People for Trees.
Right.
So can you share your story behind People for Trees and how that started?
Sure. My motivation for that was when I moved here, again, I said I loved what I saw here, the natural flatwoods, pine flatwoods that existed here. And at that time when people were having houses built, they embraced that. People were having houses built and they were saving trees. I told my builder, I only want you to take away what you have to because that's where the concrete pad's going to go. I want everything left. And he did. He left trees in the front yard. He left trees in the backyard. And yes, I have a septic system, but he still left a huge pine tree in the front yard. But then what started to happen in the mid-'90s, late '90s, is what's referred to as volume building, that you had builders that came in and realized if they just do it systematically, they scrape the land first, bring in the fill, and do that systematically, that they can get many more houses built. So I was very dismayed when I saw that because even I talked to people that said, yeah, I wanted to save that tree, but the builder said no, it had to come down. And I thought, I don't think people realize the value of those trees enough to would want to save them. So I started People for Trees. That was in October of 1997. I put a little blurb in the newspaper and said, anybody who's interested, come out to the library. I had 6 people show up, and I have to tell you, out of those 6 people, 2 of them are still with me today on the board. It's amazing. I did have it become an actual 501c3, and that was when fax machines were the latest technology. So dealing with fax machines, talking to somebody who worked out of an office in Brooklyn, New York, to get our 501c3 designation. And our goal is, our official statement is to create awareness about the importance of maintaining and protecting our native tree canopy. It's not preservation. It's not, oh, don't take that down at all, but understand that tree's value first before you make your decision. And when trees have to be taken down, then plant back, where you can. And that's really our big focus, is planting back trees. And we have done projects throughout the entire city, neighboring communities, and even as far south as Fort Myers, Punta Gorda, and Sarasota, Inglewood, and of course here in North Port. I told people, there's not an area you can point to in this city that we haven't planted a tree. They just don't realize we planted that tree because they see it, it's matured, they just figured it was always there. And it's always been there only because we planted it. So that was the start of People for Trees.
And is it Salford where you have...
The street trees.
The street trees.
Yes.
And how many trees did you plant on Salford? It was quite a few.
Yes, it was over 300. And that was a 2-summer project. The first summer we planted 120. And then the second summer we planted 180. And that was a huge collaboration with the city, because the city had and still has a tree fund. And we just felt strongly that it should be used to plant trees. That's why it's called the tree fund. So there was always a reason why. First of all, we didn't even have an arborist yet at that time. One was hired during this process and didn't have a natural resource department at all. So we were working with Public Works mainly for this. And so the first year it was challenging, but we got them in the ground. I watered them, and I tell people this is what it takes to plant a tree. Planting the tree is actually the easy part. It's the follow-up. You need 6 weeks of watering. And I got a 200-gallon water tank put on the back of my pickup truck. And even my son said, "Mom, do you have any idea how much 200 gallons of water weighs?" I said, it's okay, it's going to work. And I even had this idea that I was going to fill it using my garden hose. I said, I'll pay for the water. And he said, do you know how long that's going to take to fill that up? So I went to the city and asked for an attachment for the fire hydrant that you can pay for. Every month it's a charge, but it's like something you can hook up there and fill that tank up. And that's when I learned how fast water comes out of a fire hydrant. It was really pretty amazing. But there I was. I would teach, because I was still teaching, and I would come home and change and take the truck and fill up that water tank and water the trees. And usually it was about 3 or 4 trips back to that fire hydrant to finish watering. But that's the commitment that took.
Wow. So everybody, as you're driving down Salford going to Coco Plum to go shopping, know that was Alice and the People for Trees that planted all those trees on that pretty street.
We did the north section from Price to the interstate.
Okay, scratch that.
Yes, but we did have a hand in the South Salford where there's oak trees, because that was a collaboration with the county, because the county also had a tree fund for the entire county. And I learned about that, and I approached North Port, and I said, do you know we can get trees from the county, and they'll plant them for us? So we coordinated that as well to get oak trees planted in the south portion. So even though we physically didn't plant those trees and water them like the North Salford, we were instrumental in getting those in the ground.
Thank you so much for that. And if people wanted to have a Florida-friendly yard, but they don't know where to start, how would they start?
Well, funny you should ask, because we just had a Florida-friendly program at the North Port Library, and we do those every year. But they can contact me through the website too. We also have a tab that says Florida Friendly Gardening, and that they can print out an entire sheet. It's one sheet of plants for them to get started, that plants they'll have success with. They're Florida-friendly plants. Some are native, some are not, but they're all Florida-friendly. And it actually just goes step by step how to get started. And then they'll see what works. They'll gain some confidence that, hey, this is okay, and they'll continue from there.
Is there anything else you'd like to share while we're documenting these stories and history of North Port while you're here?
Well, I had mentioned how I taught at Port Charlotte High School. So once I did, even when I was coming from Sarasota or when I lived here, I took Toledo Blade to get out there. And it was a 2-road cow pasture road, is what we called it. However, there were mornings if I left my house on time, actually, I would see the North Port hot air balloon flying overhead, or just, it's not really flying, but it's just passing overhead. They're amazing because they're quiet, and you don't realize they're there until they make the flame go up, and you hear that roar, and it's like, what is that? And it used to land where Bobcat Trail development is today. That's where it used to land, and the gentleman whose name, I'm sorry, escapes me, but he was in the Chaser Jeep, it was called, because they never really were sure exactly where the balloon could land. I guess it depended on the wind conditions or whatever. So he would just keep an eye on it, and wherever it landed, he would go out to meet it, because he would take the people back to wherever they started from. But that was always a neat bonus to see in the morning, that going overhead. It actually passed over my yard once. And that, again, just like I said, I was just out there gardening or doing something, and I heard that huge whoosh, and I looked up, and there was that balloon, like right over my treetop, and I thought, that is just amazing. Yeah, it's a sight I'll never forget.
I love that. We had him come on our show a couple of months ago, and now for the 65th birthday of North Port, we recreated that hot air balloon. So now we try to bring it to all of our big events for a nice little photo op.
Right. It's actually on the book of the book that was done about North Port, correct?
Yes, for the 50th.
It's featured on the front cover, and People for Trees is in there. And I always remind people that I'm historical because I'm in that book, yes. But it's a great documentation of the beginnings of North Port. And a lot of that still was here. Of course, when I moved here, there were no shopping centers other than the strip malls that were along 41. The first new shopping center that came in is where the Goodwill is now on 41, but that was the Publix. So that was the first Publix we had, because if you wanted to go shopping at a Publix, you had to go down to Jacaranda in Venice or Charlotte Harbor in Charlotte County. That was it. Those were your choices. Winn-Dixie was the only grocery store. Sumter did not cross over 41. It was a T intersection, as was Salford Boulevard was a T intersection. And all of those crossings were stop signs. There were stop signs everywhere. There were no street lights other than the ones that were on 41, and that was only 3. When I came up from Welland Park not too long ago, I counted how many traffic lights are there now. I think there's 9 you have to go through to get through North Port, but back then it was just 3.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a difference.
Right. Well, that's why you got places faster, too. There wasn't really anything around. Yeah.
So we are going to end this program with a new segment called North Port Time Machine. If you could go back to any year in North Port, history or future, what year would you go to and why?
If I can go back in time, I would go back to any time in the early 90s. My son was born in 91, and it just opened a whole new world for me, but it also gave me such an opportunity to do more in my community. I started the Mommy and Me, and then from there, we had our own Easter egg hunt, and of course, yes, because my son was at that age, and then we had our own Halloween party. We called it the Spooktacular. We actually did that for 9 years, well after our own children were too old to take part. We just had such a good time doing that, and I really enjoyed all of that, being able to do things that were involved kids. And so if I can go back in time, it would be in any of those years to go through that again.
I love that. And I love, no matter where I am around town, I see you doing everything. I think one time I stopped into the North Port Art Center and you were playing your guitar for the kids, and I was like, wow, she really does a lot. And so thank you so much for bringing so much joy into this community.
Oh, it's, I know it's a cliche, but it's my pleasure. I just love being involved. I've just recently been involved with Eagle Scout, who's going for a Boy Scout who's going for his Eagle Scout Award, and it's working on our tree walk, which is along 41, just south of North Port Boulevard, refreshing it as I call. There's new plants going in, and it's so great to see people involved with the community, and that's what he did. He gathered all these people together. His name is Matthew Angley. I have to give him a lot of credit for putting this together. And I just continue to do that, and I love it.
And if people wanted to get involved with People for Trees, how could they reach out to you?
Well, they can go to our website, but they can also email me. My email is treelady, TREELADY 12001 @yahoo.com. And those numbers have they don't signify anything. I didn't realize you can change the numbers, because that's what came up when I put in Tree Lady and they gave you the choices. I said, okay, I guess I got to choose that first one. And it was years later, my son said, you could have changed that to anything you wanted, like your birth date or whatever. I didn't realize it. But anyway, I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to be involved more with greening our community and protecting our environment.
Great. Thank you so much. That's it for this episode of Voices of Northport. Thank you for listening and sharing these incredible stories, Alice, for all you do for the community. If you or someone you know has a story to share, reach out to us. Until next time.